God through logical, demonstrable proofs that are unshakable. And when you do that, to the degree you do that, you survive after death. And to the degree you don't, you do not. Okay. This is what he writes. But these are the people, those who undertake to investigate the principles of religion, notice those who go a little bit beyond what we described, they get into the antechamber, and there are different gradations of it. But those who have succeeded in finding a proof for everything that can be proved, and have a true knowledge of God as far as truth can be obtained, and are near the truth as far as is possible, they've reached the goal, and they are engaged in the palace where the king lives. So basically, it's pretty controversial, don't you agree? Right? The Rambam says, like, if you don't know metaphysics, and he goes on afterwards to say, my son, you're now engaged in studying the mathematical science and logic, so you belong to those who go around the palace in search of the gates. That's why the Chacham said Ben Zoma is still outside. Notice, according to them, even Ben Zoma, the famous Tana, didn't quite get there. Thus, when you understand physics, you've entered the hall. When you completed the study of natural philosophy, what you and I call today science, you master metaphysics, you've entered the innermost quarter and with the king in the same palace, and so on and so forth. So based on this, there developed the Maimonidean controversy, as it were. A lot of these ideas, as the Rambam said, really provoked a lot of anger. Once they got translated and read, and particularly after he died in 1204, for 100 years, they raged in southern France particularly, and in northern Spain, situations where people got divorced over this, family split, community split, and eventually this happens to be the week of Parshas Chukas. By famous tradition, this is the week where the Rambam's books were burned in Paris in 1244. It's very well known, Vart, that it says Zos Chukas HaTorah, and if you look in the Targum Onkelos, I'm sure many rabbis will repeat this this week, it says Dog Gzeira Doraisa, which means this is the Gzeira in the sense of the persecution of the Torah itself, and that's when all these things were burned. But you understand why they burned them. You understand what's going on over here. For hundreds and hundreds of years, these ideas, from the 1200s on, these ideas caused all kind of controversy in Jewish intellectual thought. Now, one of the things that happened was it provoked a Kabbalistic reaction. The Kabbalah popped out of the closet in 1280, 1290, in other words, 2-3 generations after this. And the Kabbalah offers a completely different, I won't say completely different view, but still a very different view. And by the definition itself, Kabbalah means, if you want to understand what's going on in metaphysics, you don't read Aristotle, you don't need mathematical logic, that. It's true there's a palace and all the rest of it, but the palace has to do with knowing the Sodos HaTorah al-Pi Kabbalah. That's what this guy's into, the Sefer Ha-Bris. He says that you want to understand science? Science should be pursued as science. You want to understand mathematics, geography, right? Physics, astronomy, study them in that way. But don't mix it together with metaphysics. The two have nothing to do with each other. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the science was a branch of philosophy, as I just described. Metaphysics was the supreme science, not speculative. It's not like what's going on out there we don't know, but we're just taking a total guess. It's that we can tell logically. I can prove to you, the Rambam would say in the Moreh Nevuchim, that God exists. I have arguments that are sound arguments. There's a, Aristotle's thing that everything moves, it must have started with some mover. If you like this one, the world, all fits together like a glove. So therefore, the cosmological, there must be one intelligence behind it. We can prove it scientifically. And he comes along and he says, that's all baloney. Right? Science has to do with what we can see and perceive. Right? And areas outside of that, science has nothing to say because it's not qualified to. And if it's honest, it will say that it has nothing to say on that subject. It cannot discuss, I repeat, cannot discuss whether God exists or doesn't exist, because it doesn't have the tools to go into the metaphysical. Who came up with that? This guy. Right? Kant, in the Critique of Pure Reason, wasn't coming out to defend Judaism. He actually was coming to, as he puts it here, make a study of metaphysics. And in the course of this, through a very interesting set of arguments, Kant demonstrates that knowledge is based on sensory perception. Right? It's not necessarily what's really happening, it's the way I perceive things are happening. He distinguishes very famously between the phenomenon and the noumenon, between what you see and what's actually happening. There's no way to know what's actually happening. We can only know about what we see. Right? And more importantly, when you get to areas of the metaphysics, you have the famous, what he calls the antinomies, the sets of opposing arguments. You can bring just as good an argument that God exists as you can bring an argument that you can't. If I'll pay you $10,000, you'll give me an argument over here. If you can't, I'll find a smart guy who'll give me the other kind of argument over there. And as soon as you can demonstrate that the world always existed and give equally valid arguments that the world didn't, that what you're saying is reason doesn't have anything to say in this kind of subject. Right? If you're talking about the area of the invisible and you can bring equally strong arguments on both sides, then it means that argumentation logic are not valid categories of thought, of analysis for these kinds of areas. Interesting. He didn't say it to defend Judaism. He didn't say it to defend Christianity. He said because this is what he was coming up on analyzing Ryan Vernunft, the pure reason. You understand? What does pure reason teach us? What do we mean by the terms pure reason? Known in and of itself. Well, we know nothing in and of itself. And what's really fascinating is that here you have a super frummie who is someone without any kind of secular background, but nevertheless, in spite of what I just said, was fascinated with the natural world, is a Kabbalist. He says that the way a Jew should approach God, all the rest of it, is through Mesorah and Kabbalah, like the Kuzari. Did your great-great-great-great-grandfather stand in the Har Sinai? Well, they saw it. That's where you stand on the Mesorah. You either believe in it or you don't. But if you do, then that transcends any kind of metaphysical questions, because whether or not you know the reason for it has nothing to do with whether it exists. Reason cannot tell you anything about that zone. It can't even tell you whether it exists. You can bring as strong arguments one way as you can bring the opposite. And so you're going to take your stand on, as I say, a kind of Masoretic, a Besorah kind of approach. And in wonderful rabbinic Hebrew, he has a whole chapter over here, this guy, who obviously had a shtreimel because that's what people wore in those days. And he says, Od nega achod avi al philosophy of a-machzik b'mofis yiri l'mari tzedek in Loa mimal. I'm going to bring another nega, a plague, on all those people who feel that you can use metaphysics to tell you about what's going on with God above. And what I'm going to give you now is going to be a kind of a blow that has never been administered in human history. I'm going to give them an intellectual makkah, an intellectual blow, which is never even been conceived of before. He's using the language of the 10 plagues. I'm sending all the plagues into their hearts, their minds, and I will completely undo all the philosophers in history. And I'll utterly destroy all the philosophers of the past. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, you name it. Right? Pascal, whoever you want. Bacon. Mudasos b'chol haaretz. It's well known. Ki b'shnas hei alafim takv mem aleph. In the year 1781, and this book is written about 10 years later, L'misper b'nei Yisrael kom ben chachmei philosophia umos. There arose among the Goyim an intellectual, ish chacham ma'od, v'odem yafik tvuna gedola, a very smart and powerful intellect, be'ir Königsberg, asher b'Preisen, Medina, choretz v'shonim v'chorif, extremely sharp and brilliant, Kant shmo. Right? V'chiber sefer muflag b'chachma, v'omuk omuk bo. He wrote a very deep work of chachma. V'zeh sefer mufursim ma'od, and it's very well known. I don't know how the guy knows very well. This book was so hard that even though it came out saying things against the Christian religion, the way it was run by the state of Prussia, Frederick the Great said like this: it's not necessary to ban the book. He said nobody can read it. It's not necessary to ban